Hi, everyone. Welcome to Beyond Borders by MSA. For those that don't know, MSA Novo is one of the only global institutional funds systematically investing in emerging technology markets. And with Beyond Borders, we host the world's leading technology founders and game changers. Today, we have a very special episode because we are hosting Omer Khan, founder of a Pakistan-based portfolio company, PostEx. And moderating today is our very own Tim Chen, partner at MSA Novo.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Omer, it's good to see you.
Good to see you as well, Tim.
Yeah, so we've known each other for a while now, but I think it really starts back a couple years ago when we got connected. And it was in the early days when we were looking at the Pakistani market as this burgeoning ecosystem of not just opportunities, but also talent. We saw a lot of strong talent emerge in the region via what I guess folks there called Pakistanis, or folks in diaspora returning back to Pakistan, bringing the learned skill sets and or models and wanting to build what had worked, whether it was in the Middle East or China or even US to Pakistan. So maybe with that, would love to, kind of hear your backstory, get a little introduction from your side, how you got started with PostEx.
Thank you for having me, Tim. And I remember our first call. It was almost 2.5 years ago. And to be honest, it changed the course of business for us. So thank you for that. Before starting PostEx, I was in Dubai. I was working in financial sales. And I was visiting Pakistan, and I was sitting down with one of my friends. And then we were talking about e-commerce. So when you are outside of Pakistan, you're working in a different market, you see a lot of challenges that you see in Pakistan, which are being solved or which have been solved in more developed markets. And then when you're having these kind of conversations, you're normally talking about challenges that you see in Pakistan, which are around Pakistani market. And we were talking about one of the challenges that we see only or majorly in very cash intensive markets, frontier markets like Pakistan, which is cash. And for e-commerce, cash on delivery is taking the biggest chunk, meaning 95% of transactions are cash on delivery. And the friend that I was speaking to, he was talking about starting his own e-commerce platform, but he was not able to do that because of this specific problem, because he thought that his cash will be stuck in the transaction with the courier companies or within the logistics for 10 to 15 days, which was very normal for Pakistani market. We started doing the brainstorming, and we realized that this problem is very critical for e-commerce businesses to scale, to grow, and for e-commerce in general for in Pakistani market as well. So when we started brainstorming, we realized that there are different pieces to it, which if you can solve, you can really solve the problem for e-commerce. And it was not that straightforward because it's not just around the financial services or it's not just around the logistics, because the challenges are on both sides. E-commerce platforms don't have access to funding from, you can say, conventional financial institutions. They can't go for loans because these are digital businesses. And on the logistics side, it was still very early stage for logistics infrastructure. So the problem was a bit more hybrid. And that's the reason why we came up with a hybrid model where we do financing for e-commerce platforms with embedded logistics.
Yeah, I think that's a very unique point there. Maybe take a step back. Two of the things we found in looking at emerging markets is when people think about going cashless and or digital transactions. This was right around the cusp of COVID. We saw the boost of increase in digital transactions. They don't understand that in these emerging markets, informal markets or informal businesses drive 70-80% of GDP. And although some folks might report stats such as, digital transactions are up XY%, consumers use it all the time. On the back end, those merchants are still relying on cash. They are still largely working off of how much cash do I have today to buy inventory? What's coming back to me, and therefore how much can I spend? So that problem has not been solved. And what's interesting there is when we dove into PostEx in the early days, and you told me, yeah, the way we are doing this gets us this negative working cycle where we get the cash first. That was just almost a no-brainer because if you can control the access and priority of how you where that cash flows first, then you really have a way to not just speedrun yourself into product market fit, but also, it allows you to expand much faster on cash that's coming into your as opposed to taking outside funding or relying on third parties. So yeah, that's very exciting to see in the early days.
Yeah, I mean, and when you talk about emerging markets, one of the challenges are the NPLs. We talk about a lot of startups coming in, fintechs, and they are trying to solve the problem. But the problem is not just limited to giving them access to capital. It goes ahead of it. How do you recover the capital that you have deployed in the market as well? So the products or the services that we have to build have to be based on both sides of it, right? So you have to solve where you're giving them access, but at the same time without taking any risk on the capital that you're deploying, because emerging markets are still understanding how credit systems work. They're still very underdeveloped when it comes to the financial infrastructure. So that's the reason why we thought of, look, if we do the financing for e-commerce platforms, we need to have something in place, embedded in their system, in their day-to-day ops for the recourse of the loans that we're doing or working capital financing that we're doing. And for us, when you talk about e-commerce, it was logistics. It was a no-brainer for us that, okay, e-commerce cannot operate without logistics. And if we're able to build that layer and build that relationship, we're going to be able to control the NPLs. We're going to be able to get our money back on time and solve the same problem for e-commerce platforms.
Yeah, the recourse piece is huge. Whether you're doing this type of embedded financing, or in your case, going vis-a-vis the logistics side, or we see a lot of companies trying to build fintechs off of lending, or fintech around invoice financing or anything like that. They often overlook the recourse side in the sense they always talk about, oh, how do I have access to cheap cost of debt? Fine, our amazing AI engine for underwriting, which is great, but none of that matters if you can't collect the bad debts that accrue, especially in these markets. So I think you guys were able to solve that leaky funnel from day one, which was very, very exciting to see, because surprisingly, we haven't really seen that in other markets. We haven't seen folks go with a logistics-led model.
Yeah, every market has different needs, and Pakistan has its own needs. It has its own challenges. It's a massive market. So just because something worked out or is working out in some other country or neighboring countries doesn't mean it's going to be working out in Pakistan as well, because you have to respect the market. Each market is going to evolve in a different way. And you just have to evolve your product. You just have to evolve your services as per the needs of the market. And you have to start with the biggest problem they have. And for us at that point of time was cash on delivery. Still is for e-commerce platforms, but because we have been able to solve that for them, we're seeing organic growth there. We're seeing them growing 10-15% month on month.
Yeah, I think we have to take each country and look at it individually. So speaking of market dynamics, I remember when we first looked at emerging markets and kind of the leader of e-commerce in these spaces, we looked at Jumia out in Africa, and how they started out in Nigeria and expanded over the continent. And it was interesting because for folks in Western countries, we take for granted, oh, the item will be in stock. Yeah, you could buy it online. It will arrive in Amazon 2-day shipping, whatever it might be. But when you look at Jumia, it's not certain that the product will be in stock. It's not certain that you can pay online. Chances are it's cash on delivery. And even then, the physical infrastructure in these countries are not suitable for delivering in 2 days, much less a week. And so all these problems add up. And for us, we always wanted to come in and invest in folks solving those fundamental problems. So I want to double click a bit more on Pakistan when you talk about the market dynamics. Cash is a big problem. Can you walk us through more about what is the state of e-commerce in Pakistan today? What are still some of the bigger challenges? And what does that mean for PostEx and your ability to fill those gaps?
If you go back 3 years, logistics was one of them. The infrastructure that we see for logistics, it was not that tech enabled. but we have been able to build that over the period of 3 years, a very tech-enabled infrastructure for logistics. And then access to capital. Access to capital has always been a problem for e-commerce platforms or e-commerce industry in Pakistan, because these are digital businesses, and the financial institutions that we see in Pakistan, they want something in collateral. And these businesses don't have any collateral because these are purely digital businesses. So how do they have access to capital? So one is working capital financing, which we do around cash on delivery, which solves their day-to-day ops, which solves their day-to-day working capital issues. But it's not really enough capital for them to invest on their growth capital, because there's a lot of potential we see. We see a lot of potential for e-commerce platforms to grow. We see the demand is there, but they're not able to capitalize on that because they don't have access to funds. They don't have access to capital. And we don't see a lot of fintechs solving that problem. We don't see any financial institution, conventional financial institution solving that problem. So these were the biggest problems that we saw. One is the logistics, second is cash, and third is the access to capital.
Got it. And that's a good segue for us to jump in a bit more about what was PostEx's first product, right? Walk us through, maybe in layman's terms, what was that experience like for both the customers on your platform, as well as how you interacted with them and offered them that solution to the logistics and working capital pain point?
So the normal transaction before us was if you're an e-commerce platform, you dispatch an order through a logistics company. They'll come in, pick up the product. Will take 4 to 5 days to deliver the product, collect the cash from the consumer, process it through their system, and then they had payment terms, payment dates, once every 2 weeks, once every month, and they will disperse the cash they have collected until then on that specific date. So e-commerce platforms, if they dispatch the orders today, on an average, they were getting the cash against that or the money against that in 15 to 20 days, with a massive gap in between, because sometimes they would run out of inventory, sometimes they don't have enough cash to buy more inventory, not enough money to spend on the ads, so creating big problems for them, which was hampering their growth. Our first product was a hybrid of fintech and logistics, where once the e-commerce platform starts working with us, as soon as they dispatch the order through us, they get a certain percentage upfront against the cash on delivery orders, and remaining once the product is delivered. And we take care of the logistics for them and deliver the products within 2 to 3 days nationwide. So we're covering over 600 cities in Pakistan. We're a team of around 6,500 people now, and working with over 15,000 e-commerce platforms. So we have the largest market share now within 3 years. That's how big and critical the problem was. Within 3 years, we were able to capture over 25% of the market share, and we're still growing. Alhamdulillah, we're still growing month on month, and we still see a lot of opportunity to grow in the just within Pakistan.
And in those early days, walk us through, what was it like trying to convince merchants to, in a way, your invoice factory, right? You're telling them, I will pay you a bit less, but upfront. How was that conversation versus, and then having to actually build out and get your hands dirty in managing the logistics operations? Because usually entrepreneurs like to either stay software and fintech, or they do logistics, but not both.
Yeah, it was a bit of naive for us to think that logistics is going to be easy. We thought, how difficult can it be? You just have to pick the products one place, and then you just have to deliver. We were just two friends starting off, and we bootstrapped for 1.5 years, one and a half year, and we thought that it's not going to be that hard. And the first merchant that we onboarded, the problem was so critical for e-commerce platforms is that I took the details from Facebook because I was doing the research, and I called somebody randomly and said that it's going to be a company, a startup that is going to do your logistics and give you upfront against the cash on delivery orders. It was a 5 minute call. I just explained him what we're going to do, and he didn't even bother asking the name of the company. He said, "Are you going to give me money upfront and take care of the logistics?" I said, "Yes." He was like, "I'm willing to work with you." That's how simple it was for them. You have to simplify the solution. You have to make it easy for them to understand. If you go to them, like we're talking about Pakistan 3 years ago, if you go to them and say, we are fintech, we're going to do invoice factoring, and then we'll take care of logistics, they would not understand half of it, because fintech was new at that time for Pakistan. And for people to understand how it works, they have to experience it first. And that's why we wanted to start with something that they understand, which was logistics. So our sales pitch was very simple for them because it was more around logistics, because that's what they understand or understood, and they still understand that. So uh, when you when we used to go and meet them, we would tell them we're going to take care of your logistics. With logistics, we're going to give you money upfront. So there was no invoice factoring word, there was no fintech in it. So it was just straightforward logistics with with upfront payments against cash on delivery orders. And that's how they started to understand how fintech works. That's how they started to understand that if you're giving me capital right now, they started coming up with different solutions and started coming to us, reaching out 6 months, 12 months down the line that, okay, you're solving this problem, but I still need capital to invest on my growth. I'm not able to grow. I mean, my payments are streamlined, my day to day is streamlined, but I still have potential to grow. I want to buy more inventory. I want to invest on my supply chain. So, can you help us out with that? And that's how we came up with our second product, which was around growth capital, meaning giving them a certain percentage of their sales, which they do in 30 to 60 days, and recover that from their logistics, because we're still operating as their logistics partner, meaning that inflow of 95% of their payments is through us.
Yeah, you touched on a key point, which is once you control the logistics, which a lot of founders at the time are overlooking, you allow you control almost the lifeblood of kind of the arteries of e-commerce in Pakistan, right? So today, earlier you mentioned that you guys have close to 25% market share. Tell us a bit more about that. How's the logistics business going now in terms of expansion, growth? And I'm sure you saw a lot of competitors look your way and try to copy you. How are you able to defend all these competitors, and what does that state of the market look like today?
So when you talk about the competitors, I think it's more around their DNA. Our DNA from the start was more around hybrid solution. We understood the problem, and if you want to solve the problem, you need to understand the problem as well. When you talk about competitors trying to do what we're doing, there were few competitors who tried to do what we're doing. They replicated it. They partnered with different fintechs. There were fintechs who tried to do the same thing, but it was more around being very reactive, and it was more around just trying to get the e-commerce business from us, and that led to more challenges for them because they didn't have the infrastructure, they didn't have the understanding of what we're doing and why we're doing. Just doing it is not enough because it just leaves a lot of gaps. And the way you do it needs to be done in a way that it facilitates e-commerce platforms. It needs to facilitate your customers. It should not be a burden on them. Even though you're giving them capital, but if everything is being done manually, or if the tech is not that advanced to really offer them a complete package of services with logistics, with reconciliations and payments, it's just going to lead to more problems for them. And that's what we saw. Initially, they tried to copy that, and then they started having their own internal problems around working capital because they were not able to manage that properly. So it's around understanding the problem that you're solving and building the infrastructure from day one. The foundation needs to be built in that way, because if you're trying to build the foundation when you are a logistics player and you understand logistics and you're trying to do fintech, it's very high risk.
Yeah, around the same time, I also know that you guys are thinking outside of the box. Not just, a lot of founders in early days just think about growth, but you guys got creative, found some opportunities to accelerate growth in inorganic means. Can you walk us through some of those ideas that you guys were able to execute?
For growth?
Yes.
So Tim, the growth was mostly around first focusing internally, focusing on building proper logistics, not rushing towards growth. Was mostly focused around building tech, which is going to enable the merchants, the customers that we serve, and then focusing on growth. For first 1 year, we didn't focus on growth. For first 1 year, we focused on ourselves. We focused on building the controls, focused on building the tech, focused on building the product. And then once we knew that we have been able to build the right model for the market, then we doubled down on that And for us, it has always been very direct because we are solving a big problem. So when you talk about e-commerce, not just in Pakistan, anywhere, if you talk about Middle East, if you talk about Dubai, KSA, you still see that there is a very direct relationship between the logistics and e-commerce merchants. So you need to invest on that. You need to keep focusing on that. And then, okay, we are a startup, we're a tech-enabled startup, and we could have focused on just digital marketing, performance marketing, and we would have tried to get business through that. But we would have been able to do that. But it's not about just getting the business in. It's more around how do you retain the business that you have. And in order to retain that, you need to have a very direct relationship with e-commerce. And for that, our approach have always been very direct when it comes to targeting the market, when it comes to serving the market as well. So we have a team that goes out in the market, focus on building that relationship because it's logistics. It's never going to be smooth. Like it's very operation heavy. There's always something going on, and then the customers that you have, they want to speak to someone. They want to understand the problem. They understand that this is going to happen, or there are always going to be challenges, but they just want to speak to someone to understand what the challenges are. And we need to be very transparent around that. We have always been very transparent. So that's the reason why we have been able to build that trust with the market, and that resulted in massive growth. At the start of this year, in Q1, we crossed over 21 million in ARR. We are doing $500 million in our GMV. So we're serving over 15,000 active merchants, like I said before, and it's over 25% of market share. Business-wise, we're doing over 4 million transactions a month, the largest in Pakistan ever for any logistics player or any e-commerce service provider. And that's just the logistics part. On the top of it, we're doing financing for them, managing a loan book of around $10 million per month. So we crossed 100 million in our annualized loan book 3 months ago. So this is how quickly we have been able to scale, because again, if you're solving a real problem and if you're really focused on the market, the customer that you have, they really want to work with you. And we're still seeing growth. It's not that we are here and then it's harder for us to grow from here any further. We're still seeing 10%, 15% month-on-month growth, even at this scale.
Yeah. No, it's very impressive that you're able to hit those numbers in a country that oftentimes when we talk to people who are less initiated about emerging markets, think of Pakistan as very, high instability, lots of inflation. How have you guys been able to tackle that over the last 18 months?
I mean, for us, it's been growth one side. I mean, because there was a massive growth, massive scale, and that's why we were able to hit economies of scale. Otherwise, macro were not that straightforward, were not that easy for us as well. But because we are providing a service, even though macro were affecting us, but eventually we were passing it on to the industry as well, because we cannot absorb all of it. I mean, e-commerce platforms are selling to the customers, to the consumers, and for them, they can pass it on to the consumer. So it's mostly around sharing the impact between the service providers, the e-commerce platforms, and the consumer. Unless if you want to take the whole cost or the whole impact, it's not going to be good for business. Like, we're going to go under if we're just taking the whole cost, if we're not just passing it on to the merchants, and merchants are not passing it on to the consumer. So it needs to be shared within all three stakeholders.
Yep. And speaking of, stakeholders in Pakistan, how have you navigated that market? I know in the past 6 months plus, you've been looking at other markets. Tell us a bit more about your international expansion plans.
For us, so we started in Pakistan, so we wanted to solve problems for Pakistan first, and it was not around that the market's been tough, but it has not always been that, okay, if the market is tough, we need to look at other markets. It has always been that, okay, if we started this, we need to solve this problem before we even look at any other market. And given the scale, given the growth and the team that we have been able to build in Pakistan, we know that we are in good hands, and we will, inshallah, keep growing. So that gave us an opportunity to look at other markets with similar problems around e-commerce. If you look at Saudi, if you look at Dubai, you don't see problems around cash because they're not very cash intensive markets anymore. I mean, Saudi is still to some extent, but not as much as we see in Pakistan. So we were not solving problems around cash. We were solving problems, or are solving problems, which are because of cash, which is the working capital, which is the access to capital for e-commerce. And the reason for that was, or is, cash on delivery. And when you talk about Saudi market, or when you talk about the region, Middle East region, you see the same problems. E-commerce platforms do not have access to capital. We look at more developed markets like US, Europe. There are fintechs that are solving that problem, giving them that liquidity, but we don't see that happening in Middle East region. So we still believe that there is a gap that needs to be filled, and whoever is able to fill that gap will be able to act as a catalyst for the growth, for the next phase of growth for e-commerce in the region.
Yeah, it's a good point. We still see a lot of those challenges on the working capital side, more so on the B2B. So it's less apparent for folks looking at it top down. It's more on, kind of hidden in the back, the infrastructure of how the logistics works. So you guys are dominating Pakistan. You're expanding into the GCC. What's the broader long-term vision for PostEx, let's say in 3 to 5 years' time?
So we want to build the ecosystem for e-commerce. We want to give them solutions starting from logistics to financing to payments, all of it in one place. That's what we're trying to focus on. And with the expansion into the region, with the expansion of GCC region, we see that we don't want to be just a platform or a startup that is solving problems around financing, because money should not be the only value that you create for e-commerce that you're working with. So we're testing different products. We're understanding the market in a different way. How is logistics being done in the region? Do we have the similar challenges as we see in Pakistan when it comes to logistics, which, as per our working, is not as it's way more mature as compared to what we see in Pakistan. So logistics is not as such an issue, but there are other problems around logistics, which are challenging for e-commerce platforms. So we're looking at different products, we're looking at different solutions, how to solve that problem for them, how to add value to the businesses, and then build same way, solve that problem for them, and then build on the top of that, offer them fintech services, financing services, so that you're embedded in their system, you're part of their value chain, you're adding value to them as a service provider, and then on the top of that, you're providing them financing, because that should be there to help them grow, not to just help them survive or just to keep their business going. And if you're just doing that, it's really hard to see who really needs the capital for growth and who really needs it just to survive as a business. Meaning that it's very high risk when it comes to just giving them money.
Yeah. What's interesting to me is when folks look at the broad e-commerce space, they think about platforms, ecosystems, they think about Shopify. And so when folks apply that lens to emerging markets, they think, oh, why can't you come in software, asset light, and just acquire all these businesses and then start offering, oh, let's tack on logistics, let's tack on benefit financing. But as you guys have, and as we know in emerging markets, there is a different order of operations to the same end goal. And in these markets, because working capital and logistics are the biggest pain point, you guys have done the hard and dirty work that a lot of founders spoil in the West, so to speak, or don't want to do, which is get your hands dirty and building out the logistics piece first, and that definitely has paid off.
Yeah, and it really helped us understand logistics, because most of the challenges for e-commerce are coming from there. And if you're able to solve
Yes.
that piece, you're able to solve 60-70% of the problems for e-commerce. Either it's because of logistics or it's around logistics. So you need to understand. So that's what we did in Pakistan. Because we're doing logistics, we understand the challenges of logistics companies, and we understand what challenges are there that needs to be solved for a developed market as compared to Pakistan. So it just gives us a different perspective, gives us a different understanding of the market and how to solve those problems with the first-hand information on logistics.
I think you guys are moving in the right direction. We still see logistics being a big challenge in other markets. And we've seen how if a company can dominate one market with one product and have that be a cash cow flywheel of sorts, they can then, it makes it easier to shoot downwards in adding other countries that are adjacent that make sense as well, as long as within the tangential realm of having similar challenges and needs. So we are super excited as investors day one to be part of your growth, watch you guys grow over the past 2.5 years, watch you guys start from, this logistics company that everybody wrote off because nobody wanted to touch logistics into where you guys are today. And super excited to be continuing part of that journey as you guys expand to new markets.
Thank you, Tim. You guys have been super helpful from day one. So really appreciate that.